Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photog J the Great. I will go ahead and tell you right now guys, I don't have a Canon 70D in my hands, but nonetheless I am very excited that Canon has released a 70D. I even decided to dig my Canon shirt out of my closet. But anyways, I decided to talk a little bit about my initial impressions on the camera just based off reading the specs. I was actually very excited about a lot of things that this camera brings to the table. The main thing that I'm very excited about is the fact that Canon is continuing to expand their abilities to autofocus in live view and video mode. So this camera gives you the ability to have full phase detect autofocus in live view mode. At some point in time I'll probably make a video and I'll talk about that in more detail, but in short, basically in the past, a lot of Canon DSLRs had to use a contrast detect system in live view and in video, and basically that's just the slower type of autofocus that compact point and shoot type cameras use. It's not the faster focusing system that you have in a DSLR. So in the past you could of course use very quick autofocus if you were using your viewfinder, but the moment you switched over to video mode, or the moment you switched over to live view for taking a still photo, you ended up in a scenario where you couldn't take advantage of very fast autofocus. So this is something that Canon has been doing on a lot of their newer cameras. Cameras like the T4i, the T5i, the SL1, the EOS M, all those cameras have a system where they are able to use phase detect autofocus in live view and in video. The downside to the phase detect autofocus system on those cameras is that you are still kind of limited. Basically, phase detect autofocus in a DSLR works by having a separate sensor in the camera that's responsible for handling the autofocus. The downside is that autofocus system can't work when the mirror is up. Well, in any Canon or Nikon DSLR, in order to have your live view, the mirror has to be in that position. So it was very counterintuitive to phase detect autofocus. Canon decided that they basically would take some of the phase detect sensors that are normally found in a separate area of the camera, and they decided that they would incorporate some of those into the autofocus, not into the autofocus, but into the image sensor. So now you have image capturing pixels and you have some phase detect autofocus pixels in there as well. Cameras like, say for example, the T5i, T4i, all those cameras, they only have a certain amount of phase detect photo sites on the image sensor. So, it's still, it's kind of a hybrid. Basically, the camera would use the phase detect and contrast detect focusing in combination. The big revolutionary thing about the 70D though is Canon said, hey, we think that it'd be a really awesome thing if we crammed as many of the phase detect sensors, our phase detect photo sites, onto the image sensor as possible. So what they did is they decided to come up with something. Let's see, they've given it a gimmicky name, as you would imagine. Let's see, they call it, oh yes, there it is. They call it dual pixel CMOS AF. And that's basically a fancy way of saying that on your image sensor now, this camera is, let's see here, it's a 20.2 megapixel camera. But really, this sensor has 40.2 million pixels. So really it's got twice the megapixels on the sensor is what the image actually captures. What they basically did though is, half of the pixels on the sensor, 20 million of them, are used to take the image. And the other 20 million are used for autofocusing. So anyways, without getting too terribly technical, on an image sensor you've got all your photo sites on each spot on the sensor. Canon decided, okay, we're going to take these and we're going to split them in half, and half of the pixels are going to be used to capture the image, and the other half is going to be used for the phase detect autofocus. So it should be extremely fast. The phase detect area of the sensor ends up being something like 85% or something like that. So yeah, it should be extremely fast autofocus. The only thing that I am a bit concerned about though is, as you guys may or may not know, in a camera, anytime you have pixels that are smaller, that usually affects other areas of the image performance. So basically, you know, if you start having smaller and smaller pixels in a given sensor area, typically things like high ISO start to suffer. Now, of course, sensor technology is constantly evolving, and that's why we can have lots of 20 plus megapixel DSLRs, their APS-C, that can still do, you know, extremely well at high ISO just because of changes in sensor technology. However, until something very revolutionary happens in camera technology, we won't really be in a situation where, well, there's basically no substitute for size with the current technology. So the bigger the image sensor you have in a camera, and the less pixels you have crammed into into the same space, the better the camera is usually going to do at high ISO, newer technology or not, at least up until this point in time. So that's why you start talking about cameras like full frame, or any full frame camera rather, and it's going to do much better at high ISO compared to a comparable APS-C model, just because of larger surface area and because those pixels can be larger. So it does concern me a little bit that this technology, even though it should work extremely well for autofocusing, it does concern me a bit that, remember, this is a 20 megapixel camera, but it has twice as many pixels on the sensor, you know, because you've got to have 20 million for the capturing the image and 20 million for handling the focus system. So I'm a little concerned about that. That means all the pixels will be half the size, so it'll be interesting to see how this camera does at high ISO. At this time, obviously I have not put it with the camera, so I can sit here and say that I'm a bit concerned about it, but of course we'll have to see how it does once we actually pick it up and take photographs with it. So anyways, that's the big thing about this camera. Everything else is pretty standard fare. There are some other things that get me excited about this camera though. This camera does continue on the tradition that Canon started with the 6D, in the sense that it has Wi-Fi built in. So thumbs up to Canon on that one. Nikon, they still keep on modulating us to death. So, but Canon, good on them for that. Very good that they included the Wi-Fi built into the camera. This camera also shoots a little bit faster than the previous model, the 60D. So it's now up to 7 frames a second, so that's good. They also bumped up the resolution of the monitor, like a lot of newer cameras these days. So now it's 1 million dots as opposed to the older 920,000 dot display. ISO range from 100 to 12,800. So yeah, all in all, looks very good. Just looking at the specs on paper, I'm still kind of saddened a little bit that Canon hasn't taken a page from Nikon's book and decided to put 2 card slots in their cameras in this range. So yeah, you know, it would have been nice to see 2 card slots, but I wasn't actually expecting it because Canon doesn't seem to care about doing that on anything except the higher models, as evidenced by the lack of dual card slots on the 6D and other cameras. So anyways, but not that big of a deal, but worth mentioning. So yeah, it looks really good. Hopefully within the next 2 weeks I'll have one of these in my hand and we'll get a chance to look at it. Let's see here, is there anything else that I want to mention? I think that's about it, really. The biggest thing is that autofocus system. It's been very interesting to see how all the camera manufacturers have decided to go about things a little bit differently in terms of handling things like autofocus in live view and autofocus in video mode. Of course, Sony, they have the translucent mirror technology. And Nikon, they've done quite a bit with their mirrorless cameras. They haven't done a whole lot with their DSLRs yet in this arena. Nonetheless, very interesting technology. Write me in the comments below. I'd kind of like to get an idea of what you guys would like to see in the 70D review, because I will no doubt have it in my hands pretty soon. So definitely write me in the comments below. Let me know what you think, any of your thoughts, feedback, anything like that. I'd be glad to answer any of your questions on that. Until we get our hands on the camera, this is Jeremy Smith, Photo Talk Jay the Great, signing off.